Greetings, everyone. Dr. Brian Scott with you again. We're continuing our study of the insight to the end times. You know, we're getting closer to the end of time on God's timetable, and we know that the end is near, but we don't know when it will occur. It could be tomorrow, it could be next week, it could be next month, it could be in a couple of years. We don't really know, but this we do know. The end is getting closer and closer, and we know that by what's going on in the world today. Last week in our series, we looked at Noah and the flood, and we looked at what was existing at that time, because Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days before my return. In Genesis chapter 6, two verses stand out, verse 5 and verse 6. If you'll allow me to read them to you. Verse 5 says, "The Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth." The wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intent of the thoughts of the heart, of man's heart, was only evil continually. Well, I could suggest to you that that's the same thing today in our world. We have an awful lot of wickedness. We have a lot of evil. We have a lot of mass killing, shootings. This past weekend in our country, here in Canada, they had a spree of stabbings. 10 individuals were killed, 15 or so were seriously wounded. What's going on? Evil and wickedness. Now, here's an interesting thought for you to consider. Historical records of the by Jewish scholars looking at the conditions on the earth before the flood occurred. Here's one of the things they found. They found that there was a lot of sexual perversion. Men were lying in bed with men, and women were lying in bed with women. In other words, they were in homosexual type activities, same-sex activities. This is sexual perversion according to the scriptures. This is something that is an abomination to God. This is wickedness, and it led to the flood. God said in verse number 6, the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth. Wow, powerful stuff. Then we fast forward to Genesis chapter 13, for instance. This is the story of Abram and Lot following the Lord's instructions to leave the land where they were and go to a place that God would show them. And they go to a place that is so rich and fertile, and their herds and their flocks and so on were so large, they had to separate. One went to the right, one went to the left. Lot chose the lands, and I'm going to say to the left, and that was where Sodom and Gomorrah was located, and Abram took the lands to the right. Now, Lot selected those lands to the left because I guess the grass was greener, and that's where the expression, the grass is greener on the other side, comes from. But what we see in verse 13 of chapter 13 is that the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. Pretty strong words when it adds the word exceedingly to wicked. It says it's bad. And then in Genesis 19, we see the story of the destruction that's going to come to the land because of this wickedness. In verse 1, it says, 2 angels came to Sodom, and they ended up meeting with Lot, and they end up going to Lot's home. Verses 4 through 8, may I paraphrase for sake of time. It says that these 2 angels go into Lot's home with him. He closes the door, and the men of the city of Sodom, both young and old, from every quarter, they surround the house, and they demand of Lot, bring out those 2 men, that we may know them carnally, that we can have sex with them. This is beyond comprehension. They show up at Lot's house, a whole group of sodomites, and they demand that Lot bring these 2 men out, these 2 angels out, so they can have homosexual sin with them, sex with them. And Lot says no. He says, please don't do so wickedly. And then, beyond comprehension, Lot in verse number 8 says, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. They're virgins. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do with them as you wish. But do nothing to these two men. How do you explain that? How do you explain a father offering up his two virgin daughters to a bunch of perverted men, and they can do whatever they want with them? This is the state that existed in Sodom and Gomorrah at that time. And then we have to drop down to verses 24 and 25, where Lot, the Lord rained down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah. And the fire and brimstone overthrew the cities, overthrew the plains, overthrew all the inhabitants, and overthrew or destroyed everything that was growing there. In other words, where sexual perversion was on steroids, that means out of control, God said, I've had enough, and I'm going to send destruction. We're living in those times. We're living in those times. We're on the verge. And I've got more to share with you this week. This sets the stage for what we'll share. Don't miss us as we come back tomorrow afternoon. Thank you. See you then. Bye.